Whispers of the Hollow. The town of Blackthorn Hollow was a forgotten dot on the map, cloaked in a perpetual fog that seemed to bleed into the bones of its few remaining residents. Once a thriving village, it now bore the scars of abandonment, shattered windows, overgrown graveyards, and streets that creaked under the weight of an unsettling quiet. It was the kind of place where secrets festered in the shadows and stories of the cursed forest nearby were told in hushed whispers. The stranger's arrival. On a particularly frigid evening, a stranger arrived at the Hollow's only inn, the Crimson Lantern. Dressed in a weathered coat and carrying a leather satchel, his name was Elias Grayson, a historian fascinated by the macabre. He had come to document the tales of Blackthorn Hollow, a town once whispered to be the gateway to the otherworld. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Maeve, eyed him warily. "Best you leave before sundown," she muttered, handing him the key to a creaking room on the second floor. "The Hollow doesn't take kindly to outsiders." Elias smiled politely, dismissing her warning as rural superstition. He was here for the truth, after all. The stories of Blackthorn Hollow ****. The next morning, Elias roamed the village, speaking to anyone willing to share its eerie tales. An old man named Garrett told him about the Wailing Widow, a specter that haunted the chapel ruins, crying for the children she lost to the woods. A young woman named Lila recounted her encounter with the Faceless Man, a shadow that stalked her home, its hollow face a void that consumed the light. But the most chilling tale came from a reclusive blacksmith, Amos. "It's the forest you should fear," he said, his voice trembling. "They call it the Ebon Woods, and it's alive. People go in and don't come out. Those that do," he trailed off, exposing a mutilated hand. "They don't come back the same. Into the Ebon Woods ****. That night, driven by morbid curiosity, Elias decided to venture into the Ebon Woods. Armed with a lantern and his notebook, he followed a faint path, ignoring the growing unease in his gut. The air turned colder with every step, and the sounds of the night, crickets, owls, and rustling leaves, ceased entirely. The deeper he ventured, the more distorted reality became. Trees twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches forming grotesque shapes. Elias felt as though he were being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on him. Then he saw it. A cabin, hidden among the trees, its windows glowing with an unnatural light. He approached cautiously, pushing open the door to find the walls adorned with ancient symbols drawn in blood. In the center of the room stood a black mirror, its surface rippling like water. The mirror's curse ****. Unable to resist, Elias touched the mirror. The surface was icy, pulling at his hand like quicksand. Suddenly, his reflection morphed into something grotesque. A gaunt, pale figure with sunken eyes and a wicked grin. It spoke without moving its lips. "Welcome, Keeper. The Hollow has chosen you." Elias yanked his hand away, but it was too late. The cabin disappeared, and he found himself back in the woods, the symbols from the cabin now etched into his skin. The whispers began, a chorus of voices, some pleading, others laughing cruelly. The truth revealed ****. Over the following days, Elias realized he could no longer leave Blackthorn Hollow. The whispers followed him everywhere, growing louder when he tried to escape. The townsfolk avoided him, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear. Maeve finally confessed the truth. "The Hollow is a trap," she said. "Every few decades, it chooses a new keeper to guard its secrets. The mirror bound you to this place. You are part of it now." Desperate, Elias returned to the Ebon Woods, hoping to destroy the mirror and break the curse. But the forest had changed. The path was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of trees that seemed to mock his every move. He wandered for what felt like days, the whispers turning into screams. At last, he stumbled upon the mirror again. But this time, his reflection wasn't alone. Behind him stood shadowy figures, faceless yet familiar. The wailing widow, the faceless man Amos. They were all previous keepers, their souls trapped in eternal torment. Elias screamed as the mirror pulled him in, his body dissolving into the glass. His last thought was a chilling realization. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The new keeper ***. The next morning, the fog lifted briefly, revealing Blackthorn Hollow to a passing traveler. Drawn by its eerie charm, they decided to stop at the Crimson Lantern. Inside, a stranger sat by the fire, a man with a gaunt face and sunken eyes, who smiled a wicked grin. "Welcome," he said softly, his voice dripping with malice. "Let me tell you about the Hollow." And so the cycle continued. The Watcher in the fog. The village of Duskhaven was veiled in an eternal fog so thick it was said to devour the unwary. The townsfolk lived in fear of the mist, for within it lurked a creature they called the Watcher. It was an ancient legend, whispered to children as a warning. Never walk alone in the fog, or the Watcher will find you. A stranger comes to Duskhaven. One dreary evening, a stranger named Thomas Vane arrived in Duskhaven. He was a photographer and explorer, drawn by the mysterious allure of the town and its infamous fog. The villagers greeted him with suspicion. At the local tavern, a grizzled old man, Elias, pulled him aside. "You're a fool to stay," Elias warned. "The fog is alive, and the Watcher is real. It takes those who don't belong." Thomas dismissed the warning with a laugh, chalking it up to superstition. Yet, as the evening wore on, he couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that the fog outside the tavern windows was pressing closer, as though it were listening. The first night, Thomas stayed in an old boarding house at the edge of the village. That night, he set up his camera by the window, hoping to capture the fog's ethereal beauty. As he adjusted the lens, he saw movement, a shadow shifting unnaturally in the mist. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, the camera slung around his neck. The air was icy, and the fog seemed to thicken as he ventured further from the house. He snapped a few photos, but the fog seemed to swirl angrily, almost alive. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound, like footsteps. Turning quickly, he shone his flashlight into the fog, only to find nothing but swirling gray. He returned to the house, unsettled, and spent the rest of the night reviewing his photographs. In one, he saw it, a tall, gaunt figure standing in the fog, its face obscured but its hollow eyes glaring straight at the lens, unraveling the legend. The next day, Thomas questioned the villagers about the Watcher. Most refused to speak, averting their eyes as they muttered prayers under their breath. Finally, he found Elias again, who reluctantly told him the truth. "The Watcher isn't just a spirit," Elias said. "It's a guardian of something buried deep beneath this village, something we were never meant to disturb. Those it takes. They're never found, at least not as themselves." Thomas, intrigued rather than frightened, pressed for more information. Elias leaned closer, whispering, "If you want answers, go to the old church. But be warned, you won't like what you find, the church in the fog." That evening, Thomas ventured to the ruins of the old church, long abandoned and swallowed by the fog. The air grew colder the closer he got, and the whispers began, soft, insidious voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Inside the church, the atmosphere was suffocating. The fog seeped through broken windows, curling around the pews like spectral fingers. At the altar, he found an ancient book, its pages filled with strange symbols and sketches of a tall, eyeless figure. the Watcher. One page was translated: "The Watcher guards the threshold. The fog is its domain. To see its eyes is to lose your soul. To hear its voice is to forget who you are." Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, forming words. "Why have you come?" Thomas spun around, his flashlight flickering. A shadow detached itself from the fog, standing at the doorway. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its face featureless save for two deep, black voids where eyes should have been. The Watcher's judgment. Frozen in terror, Thomas raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash illuminated the figure for a split second, and he saw its full form. Its skeletal hands reaching out, its hollow eyes boring into him. The camera slipped from his hands as the fog surged forward, wrapping around him like a living thing. He tried to scream, but the fog choked the sound from his throat. Images flooded his mind, glimpses of those the Watcher had taken before him, their faces blank, their eyes wide with eternal fear. Then, everything went black. The aftermath. Days later, the villagers found Thomas's camera near the old church. Of Thomas himself, there was no sign. The villagers buried the camera, fearful of whatever curse it might carry. But not before Elias viewed the final photo. In the picture, Thomas stood frozen in the fog, his eyes replaced by dark, hollow voids. Behind him loomed the Watcher, its skeletal hands resting on his shoulders, its eyeless gaze fixed on the lens. From that day on, the fog seemed thicker, the whispers louder, and the Watcher, it seemed, had claimed another soul. A warning to all. Duskhaven remains shrouded in fog, and the villagers continue their warnings to strangers. Never walk alone in the fog. If you hear the whispers, turn back. And if you see the hollow eyes of the Watcher, pray it isn't already too late.